A 15-year-old girl refused to give up her bus seat 9 months before Rosa Parks, and she was dragged off in handcuffs. A math genius calculated the path for the moon landing by hand when computers failed. These are not just stories. They are the hidden truths of how America was really built. One man on this list even beat Thomas Edison in court. 1. Annie Turnbow Malone. You might have heard of Madam C.J. Walker. She is famous all over the world for being the first female self-made millionaire in the United States. But here is the kicker that most history books leave out. She actually learned everything she knew from a woman named Annie Turnbow Malone. Annie Malone was the original pioneer, a chemistry genius who did not just sell products. She built an entire empire that laid the groundwork for the modern beauty industry. Annie was born in Illinois just a few years after the Civil War ended. It was a time when options for black women were extremely limited, but Annie loved science. She realized early on that hair care products for black women at the time were damaging and dangerous. They used harsh animal fats and chemicals that ruined the scalp. So she went into her kitchen and started mixing. She was like a scientist in a lab, testing different ingredients until she found the perfect formula. She created a special treatment that changed the game. It was not just about looking good, it was about health. She called it the Wonderful Hair Grower, and let me tell you, it worked better than anything else on the market. She did not stop at selling bottles door to door, although she was great at that too. She had a vision that was much bigger. In 1918, she built a massive building in St. Louis called Poro College. This place was incredible. It was not just a school, it was a community hub that served as a safe haven. It had a bakery, a chapel, an auditorium, and even emergency housing. It employed hundreds of people in the community. Annie Malone was so rich that she paid almost $40,000 in income tax in the 1920s. In today's money, that is a massive fortune. She was a millionaire before anyone else in the game even knew what hit them. What many overlooked is her heart. She gave away millions to charities, schools, and orphanages. She wanted to lift up her entire community, not just herself. She donated the land for the St. Louis Colored Orphans Home. But because she was so humble and focused on the work, and because her former student, Madam C.J. Walker, became so famous and had a flair for marketing, Annie often gets left out of the conversation. She passed away in 1957, but her legacy is built into the foundations of the beauty industry. Annie Malone built a business empire that changed lives and appearances. But the next man on our list built an empire of words that changed the entire map of the United States and scared powerful people in the process. 2. Robert Sengstack Abbott. Imagine living in a place where you are treated like a second-class citizen and you have no way of knowing that life could be better somewhere else. You are trapped. Robert Sengstack Abbott decided to change that dynamic forever. He founded a newspaper called the Chicago Defender in 1905. He started it with just 25 cents and a folding table in his landlord's kitchen. It sounds like a humble beginning, but that little paper turned into one of the most powerful tools in American history. Abbott wanted to show black families in the South that there were good factory jobs and a safer life up north in Chicago. He filled his paper with job listings, train schedules, and success stories of people who had made the move. He called it the Great Northern Drive. He was selling a dream of freedom. But there was a major problem. White landowners in the South relied on cheap labor, and they did not want their workers to leave. They tried to ban the newspaper. They would confiscate it from the mail and even threaten anyone caught reading it. It was a dangerous time to be a paperboy, so Abbott had to get creative. He used a network of railroad porters to smuggle the papers onto trains heading south. These porters were the internet of their day. They would drop bundles of the Chicago Defender in towns along the way, often tossing them into fields or handing them off in secret. It was like a secret underground information network, and it worked better than anyone expected. Over 1 million people left the South and moved to northern cities because of what they read in his paper. This massive movement of people is known as the Great Migration, and it changed the demographics of America forever. Robert Abbott became a millionaire, but more importantly, he gave people hope. He showed them a way out of a bad situation. He faced threats and bans, but he never stopped printing the truth. His paper became the voice of a generation that refused to be silenced. While Abbott was fighting for justice in the press and moving millions of people, our next pioneer was fighting for justice in the courts. She broke a barrier that had stood for nearly 200 years and stared down the most powerful men in New York. 3. Jane Boleyn. The legal system in the 1930s was an intimidating place. It was run almost entirely by white men in robes, but Jane Boleyn did not let that stop her. She was a woman of firsts who refused to take no for an answer. She was the first black woman to graduate from Yale Law School. That alone is a massive achievement that required nerves of steel, but she was just getting started. In 1939, the mayor of New York City called her into a meeting at the World's Fair. She went to the meeting thinking she was going to get a reprimand or maybe some minor correction on her work. Instead, he shocked everyone. He swore her in as a judge. At just 31 years old, Jane Boleyn became the first black female judge in the United States. It was huge news around the world. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. But Jane did not care about the fame or the headlines. She cared about the work. She was assigned to the Domestic Relations Court, which dealt with families and children in crisis. What she saw there broke her heart. Children were being treated like criminals just because they had nowhere else to go. They were wearing uniforms that looked like prison clothes, and they were segregated by the color of their skin. Jane Boleyn decided to change all of that immediately. She stopped the practice of assigning probation officers based on race. She made sure that child care agencies receive public funding regardless of race or religion. She fought to treat every single child with dignity and respect. She served on the bench for 40 years. That is 4 decades of making sure that the most vulnerable people got a fair shake in a system that often ignored them. She was quiet and dignified, but her impact was loud. She refused to retire until she was forced to by mandatory age limits at 70. She opened the door for every woman of color who sits on a judge's bench today. Jane Boleyn made the courts safer for families and children, but the next man on our list made the open road safer for everyone, and his simple invention became a literal lifesaver for thousands of travelers. 4. Victor H. Greene. In the 1930s and 40s, taking a road trip was a dangerous gamble for black families. You could not just stop at any gas station or motel like you can today. If you stopped at the wrong place, you could be refused service, chased away, or face severe violence. There were towns where you were not allowed to be after dark. A mail carrier from Harlem named Victor H. Greene saw this problem and came up with a brilliant solution. He created a travel guide. It was officially called the Negro Motorist Green Book, but everyone just called it the Green Book. It looked like a simple pamphlet, small enough to fit in a pocket, but it was essential survival gear. Victor gathered information from his fellow postal workers all over the country. They told him which hotels, restaurants, and gas stations were safe for black travelers. It was a massive crowdsourced project before the internet even existed. The guide covered the whole country. It listed places where you could get a meal without being harassed and where you could sleep without fear. Victor Greene once said that he hoped one day his book would not be needed anymore. He hoped for a time when people could travel freely without looking over their shoulder. But until that day came, he was going to keep people safe. He updated it every year, adding new safe havens and removing places that had become dangerous. The Green Book became a staple in the glove compartment of nearly every black family with a car. It allowed people to see the country and visit relatives without constant anxiety. Victor Greene passed away in 1960, just a few years before the Civil Rights Act passed. He did not live to see the day his book became obsolete, but his work saved countless lives on the lonely highways of America. Victor Greene navigated the roads of a segregated America. The next man on our list navigated the laws to destroy segregation once and for all. They called him the man who buried Jim Crow. 5. Charles Hamilton Houston. You likely know about Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice, but you need to know about the man who taught him everything and designed the strategy he used. Charles Hamilton Houston was a brilliant legal mind and the dean of Howard University Law School. He had a very specific plan. He wanted to dismantle the laws of segregation one by one, using the Constitution as his primary weapon. Houston was a genius strategist. He knew he could not just attack the whole system at once because he would lose. He had to pick the right battles. He decided to focus on schools. He traveled through the South with a movie camera, filming the terrible conditions of black schools compared to white schools. He wanted visual proof that separate was definitely not equal. The conditions were shocking. He filmed schools with no desks, no books, and holes in the roofs where rain would pour in. He mentored a whole generation of black lawyers, including Thurgood Marshall. He taught them to be social engineers. He told them that a lawyer who is not a social engineer is a parasite on society. That is a heavy statement that drove his students to work harder. He led the legal battles that set the stage for the famous Brown versus Board of Education case. He was the mastermind behind the scenes, moving the chess pieces. Sadly, the work took a toll on his health. He worked himself to exhaustion, traveling miles and staying up late preparing cases. He passed away in 1950 at the young age of 54. He died 4 years before the Supreme Court finally ruled that segregation in schools was illegal. He did not get to see the final victory, but he drew the map that got them there. Houston used the law to fight for equality. Our next pioneer used the power of words to show the beauty and struggle of everyday life, winning the biggest prize in writing while sitting in the dark. 6. Gwendolyn Brooks' poetry might seem like just words on a page to some, but for Gwendolyn Brooks, it was a way to capture the soul of a city. She grew up in Chicago and watched the world from her window and her front porch. She wrote about the people she saw every day, regular people, the people struggling to pay rent, the kids playing in the alley, and the mothers trying to keep their families together against the odds. In 1950, something incredible happened. Gwendolyn Brooks won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. She was the first Black author to ever win it. It was a massive deal that shocked the literary world. But the thing is, she found out in a very strange way. She did not get a fancy phone call at first. The electricity had been turned off in her house because they could not pay the bill. She found out she won the biggest prize in literature while sitting in the dark with her son. That moment sums up her work perfectly. She found beauty and importance in the hard realities of life. She did not leave her community after she got famous. She stayed in Chicago and taught poetry to young people. She wanted the next generation to know that their stories mattered. She mentored hundreds of young writers, encouraging them to use their voices. She changed the way literature was viewed in America. She proved that the story of a Black family in Chicago was just as important and as beautiful as any king or queen in a history book. Gwendolyn Brooks wrote about the people in her neighborhood. The next person on our list was a teenager from a similar neighborhood who took a stand that changed history, but was told to stay quiet about it. 7. Claudette Colvin. We all know the story of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus. It is one of the most famous moments in history. But 9 months before Rosa Parks said no, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin did the exact same thing. It was March of 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. Claudette was sitting on the bus coming home from school, tired and carrying her books. The driver told her to move for a white passenger who had just boarded. Claudette refused. She later said that it felt like Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing her down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth's hands were pushing down on the other. She was glued to that seat by history and justice. The police were called and they dragged her off the bus. She kicked and screamed. They put her in handcuffs and took her to an adult jail. A 15-year-old girl, terrified but brave. So why isn't her face on the statues? Well, the civil rights leaders at the time felt she wasn't the right face for the movement. She was young, she had a darker skin complexion, and shortly after the arrest, she became pregnant. They thought the public would not support her, so they waited for Rosa Parks, who was an older, respected adult, to make the stand. But Claudette did not disappear. She was actually one of the main plaintiffs in the court case that officially ended bus segregation. Rosa Parks was the symbol, but Claudette Colvin was the spark that started the fire. She stood up when nobody else would. Claudette was the spark, but the next woman was the engine that kept the entire civil rights movement running, even though she hated the spotlight. 8. Ella Baker. If you look at the civil rights movement, you see a lot of charismatic men giving speeches at podiums. But the person doing the actual work behind the scenes, the one making sure things actually happened, was almost always Ella Baker. She was the organizational genius. She did not care about being famous. She famously said that strong people do not need strong leaders. She believed in the power of ordinary people to change their own lives. Ella Baker worked with all the big groups. She worked with the NAACP and helped Martin Luther King Jr. set up his organization. But she often clashed with the men in charge. She felt they focused too much on speeches and not enough on empowering the poor and the young. She wanted action, not just words. So she went and helped form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. This group was made up of young college students who were ready to risk everything. They were the ones doing the sit-ins at lunch counters and the freedom rides on buses. Ella Baker was their mentor. She taught them how to organize, how to run meetings, and how to make decisions together without a boss telling them what to do. She was like the wise grandmother of the revolution. Without Ella Baker, the movement would have lost its energy and its direction. She understood that a movement is not about one special person leading the way. It is about everybody working together to push the rock up the hill. Ella Baker fought for the right to organize. Our next hero fought for the simple right to love who she wanted, taking her battle all the way to the Supreme Court. 9. Mildred Loving. Mildred Loving did not set out to be an activist. She was not trying to start a revolution. She just wanted to be married to her husband, Richard. The problem was that Mildred was black and Native American, and Richard was white. In 1958, in the state of Virginia, that marriage was a crime. They got married in Washington, D.C., where it was legal, but when they came back home to Virginia to start their life, the police raided their house in the middle of the night. They were arrested in their bedroom. The judge told them they had to leave the state of Virginia for 25 years if they wanted to stay out of jail. It was a cruel and heartbreaking sentence. They had to leave their families, their friends, and their home just because they loved each other. They moved to D.C., but they missed home desperately. Mildred decided to write a letter to the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, asking for help. That simple letter started a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1967, the court ruled in the case Loving versus Virginia. They struck down all laws banning interracial marriage in the United States. It was a massive victory for civil rights. Mildred was a quiet woman. She did not give loud speeches. She just wanted to live her life in peace. But her love story changed the Constitution and paved the way for millions of families. Love won in the court, but the next woman on our list used numbers to win the space race and beat the computers. 10. Katherine Johnson. When you think of NASA and astronauts, you usually think of brave men in spacesuits. But none of them would have gone anywhere without Katherine Johnson. She was a mathematician, a human computer. In the 1950s and 60s, electronic computers were huge, expensive, and not always reliable. They were prone to crashing, so NASA relied on brilliant people to do the math by hand to double-check everything. Katherine was a genius with numbers. She calculated the trajectory for Alan Shepard, the first American in space. But her biggest moment came with John Glenn. He was about to orbit the Earth, which was a dangerous and complex mission. NASA was using a new electronic computer to plan the flight, but John Glenn did not trust it. He famously said, "Get the girl to check the numbers." He meant Katherine. He said if she says they are good, then he was ready to go. Katherine spent days recalculating the entire flight path by hand to make sure the machine was right. And she was. John Glenn went up, orbited the Earth, and came home safely, all thanks to her math. Katherine later helped calculate the path for the Apollo 11 moon landing. She worked in a time when she faced double discrimination for being black and for being a woman, but her brain was so valuable that NASA could not function without her. She broke the glass ceiling and reached for the stars, proving that intelligence has no gender or color. Katherine was doing the math, but our next pioneer was managing the people and the machines. She saw the future coming before anyone else. 11. Dorothy Vaughan. Dorothy Vaughan was another hidden figure at NASA who changed the game. She started working there during World War II when the country desperately needed mathematicians. She became the head of the West Area Computers, a group of black female mathematicians. She was the first black supervisor at NASA. That was a huge deal in a segregated workplace where people were often kept apart. But Dorothy was smart in more ways than one. She saw the first big electronic computers arriving at NASA. These were massive machines that filled a whole room and made a lot of noise. While other people were scared that these machines would take their jobs, Dorothy decided to embrace the change. She taught herself a programming language called Fortran. She did not just keep the knowledge to herself. She taught the women on her team. She knew that if they could program the computers, they would always have jobs, no matter how much technology changed. She transformed her team from human computers into expert programmers. She saved their careers by looking ahead and adapting. Dorothy Vaughan was a leader who looked out for her people. She understood that you have to adapt to survive, and she made sure no one was left behind. Dorothy adapted to technology, but the next woman on our list had to fight the legal system just to get the education she needed to become an engineer. 12. Mary Jackson. Mary Jackson had a brilliant engineering mind. She worked at NASA too, alongside Catherine and Dorothy. She wanted to be an engineer, but there was a ridiculous hurdle in her way. To get the promotion, she needed to take graduate-level classes in math and physics. The problem was that the classes were held at a local high school that was for white students only. Most people would have given up right there. Mary Jackson went to court. She petitioned the city of Hampton, Virginia, to let her attend the classes. She stood in front of a judge and argued her case with passion and logic, and she won. She was allowed to go to the night classes, but she was the only black person and the only woman in the room. It must have been incredibly isolating, but she did not let it stop her. She finished the courses with flying colors and became NASA's first black female engineer. She spent years working on wind tunnels and analyzing how air moved around planes at supersonic speeds. But later in her career, she did something surprising. She saw that other women were struggling to get promoted, so she took a demotion to become a human resources manager. She spent the rest of her career helping other women and minorities get hired and promoted at NASA. She held the door open for those coming behind her. Mary Jackson engineered machines and careers. Our next pioneer engineered a new way for the world to see black culture through dance. 13. Alvin Ailey. Dance is a language, and Alvin Ailey spoke it better than anyone. He founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in 1958. Before him, modern dance was very abstract and often disconnected from real emotion. It was seen as something only for the elite. Alvin wanted to put the black experience on stage for everyone to see. He used blues, spirituals, and gospel music to tell stories. His most famous piece is called Revelations. It is a masterpiece that tells the story of African American faith and tenacity, from slavery to freedom. When you watch it, you feel the pain, the sorrow, and the ultimate joy. It is a spiritual experience. Alvin Ailey took his company all over the world. They became known as cultural ambassadors for the United States, performing in front of kings, queens, and regular people in dozens of countries. He showed global audiences the beauty and depth of black culture. He broke barriers in the art world, which was often very exclusive. He proved that dance could be about more than just movement. It could be about history, soul, and survival. Alvin Ailey moved people with dance. The next woman on our list moved the conscience of a nation with her voice and her sheer endurance. 14. Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was the youngest of 20 children born to sharecroppers in Mississippi. She worked in the cotton fields from the time she was 6 years old. She had a hard life full of labor and struggle. In 1962, she went to a meeting about voting rights. She was 44 years old, and she did not even know that black people had the right to vote because nobody had ever told her. When she found out, she was fired up. She tried to register to vote, and the plantation owner kicked her off the land where she had lived for years. She was shot at and beaten by police in a jail cell so badly that she had permanent kidney damage and a limp for the rest of her life. But she did not back down. She famously said, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." In 1964, she helped found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. She went on national television and told the story of how she was beaten just for trying to register to vote. President Lyndon B. Johnson was so scared of her testimony that he held a press conference just to interrupt the broadcast. But it didn't work. The networks played her speech later, and the whole country heard her raw, powerful voice. She was a powerhouse. She proved that you do not need a fancy education to be a leader. You just need courage and the truth. Fannie Lou Hamer spoke truth to power. Our next leader organized the biggest event in civil rights history, but had to stay out of the spotlight because of who he loved. 15. Bayard Rustin. The 1963 March on Washington is iconic. That is where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. But the man who actually organized that march, who planned the buses, the sandwiches, the portable toilets, and the logistics for 250,000 people, was Bayard Rustin. Rustin was a brilliant organizer. He was the one who taught Dr. King about nonviolent resistance. He had studied the methods of Gandhi in India and brought those ideas to the civil rights movement. But Rustin had a target on his back. He was an openly gay man in a time when that was dangerous and illegal. Many other civil rights leaders were afraid that Rustin's personal life would be used to attack the movement. They tried to push him aside, but Dr. King knew he needed Rustin's brain, so Rustin worked in the background. He was the architect of the march, managing thousands of details to ensure it was peaceful and effective, but he did not get to stand in the front row. For decades, his name was left out of the history books, but without Bayard Rustin, the March on Washington might have been a chaotic failure instead of a historic success. He was the invisible hand that made it all work. Rustin organized the march. Our next pioneer led the marchers right into the face of danger on a bridge in Selma. 16. Hosea Williams. Hosea Williams was a different kind of activist. He was a scientist first. He was a chemist who worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but he was also a tough, no-nonsense guy. He served in World War II and was nearly ended by a bomb. When he came home, he was beaten for drinking from a white-only water fountain. That woke him up to the reality of his country. He joined the civil rights movement and became one of Dr. King's most trusted field lieutenants. Dr. King called him the bull in the china shop because Hosea was not afraid to get loud and make a scene to get attention for the cause. He was the one who would lead the marches into the most dangerous places. On March 7, 1965, Hosea Williams stood next to John Lewis at the front of a line of marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. They were marching for voting rights. State troopers were waiting for them with billy clubs and tear gas. Hosea looked danger right in the eye. That day became known as Bloody Sunday. The images of them being beaten shocked the world and led to the passing of the Voting Rights Act. Hosea Williams was the tough guy who held the line when things got scary. The next person on our list started a revolution by throwing a brick, or maybe a shot glass, at a bar in New York City.